Hello and welcome to the GX Podcast, the world's first podcast focused on government services and their future. In this podcast, we talk about everything related to government excellence, government service design and delivery, GovTech, and citizen engagement. Join us for insightful interviews and conversations every month. Visit us online at gx.ae. Deb Westphal and Sohail Inayatullah, welcome to the GX podcast. I'm so thrilled because we have two incredible futurists on the panel today. We're going to talk about the future of governments, government experience, and everything that you guys feel is going to happen in the next few years to a few decades. So welcome to the GX podcast. How are we doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Let's do a quick recap for our audiences. Deb, you're based out of Salt Lake City in the United States, and Sohail, you're in Melbourne. So we're working across a wide number of time zones. So thank you for making this work, both of you. Deb, let me start off with you. You've had a lot of experience in the futures world. You've worked with Toffler Associates. You worked with Alvin Toffler, who's really done some incredible work in the world of futurism, in understanding the world. Tell us about that experience of working with Alvin Toffler and the organization.
Well, the experience is incredible, and it was life-changing, actually. And how it relates to this conversation is, Al and Heidi were very much around the revolution that would be happening would be around societies and people, and that technology would be the fuel, if you would, for that revolution. And so, that convergence with technology and changing social norms and values. And how it's going to change organizations is why we're here today to talk about.
Incredible, thank you. And Sohail, you have a really long bio. I cannot go through all of it. It's just incredible what you've done over the years. But you've done work in Hawaii. You've done work in you run an institute in Australia, the Futures Institute. And you also mentioned to me just recently that now you're the futurist in residence at an organization in the Middle East. Tell us about that.
This was the government of Abu Dhabi with the Department of Culture and Tourism. So it's kind of a one-year program to get them to be futures-oriented, develop anticipatory governance, start to see how the world is changing. And then really is not just how the world is changing. Phase 2 is methods and tools, and phase 3 is practicing the methods and tools so it becomes a built-in capability.
Incredible. Let's talk about government. So the GX podcast is all about helping understand the future of governments, government experience, government service delivery. So we're in the era of COVID-19, and this is one of those things that's happening worldwide. I mean, imagine something like this binding us all together. So everybody's fighting against it. COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on how governments behave, how they roll out services, what they prioritize. And let's talk about the situation right now. So we're doing vaccine rollouts and all of that is happening. Tremendous load on governments. What are your thoughts on some of the challenges that governments are facing right now and what they should anticipate or plan for if we think about the next 1 to 3 years? Let's hope it doesn't take that long for the rollouts. But what are we looking at happening going forward? Who would like to take that question?
I'll let Sohail go first, and
okay.
then I can come back.
We finished a research project on that. My colleague Ivana Milevich, she led it. And the conclusion was 3 factors. Factors 1 is anticipatory, right? You want to develop foresight in all your capabilities. Factor 2 is social trust. And factor 3 is public health. US was ranked number 1 on pandemic foresight capability. 450,000 deaths later, we know foresight capability is not the critical variable. Social trust and public health are. So if you go in the next 3 years or the next 50 years, would those three factors remain critical? Whether it's public health, public housing, public education, there's a base every economy in the world needs. Once citizens feel safe, a safety net, then you develop the social trust. Once you have that, then of course foresight is critical. Without the other two, you know the future is coming, but there's nothing you can do, and that makes citizens feel even worse. Now, for the next steps for governance, given the trust is low in some countries, you have to understand the worldview, for example, of the anti-vax movement. I mean, it's distressing, but we have to take into account their worldview and develop communication projects that understand their fears and as much as possible address them so they buy in, which is a social trust part. That's at local, national, and global levels.
Yeah, I think I would add to that, and I think I think we need to be careful of concentrating too much on COVID, and in today, I think what happened in COVID was when everything stopped in a very weird way, it highlighted those gaps in all of our systems. But the human system, the humanity system now is, through technology is empowered to try to make changes. It's interesting. I pulled some data from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And just in the last 3 years, the large scale protests around the world have gone up. And 110 countries have had over 230 very large scale and significant anti-government protests. And these things are not just around, COVID and their response, but it is around ineffective governance, corruption, human rights, environmental concerns. So people are frustrated. And a lot of these are in countries that are authoritarian or leaning authoritarian. So it's not just around democratic, or democratic leading countries. So I think what Sohail said about being anticipatory is very important. And one of the things that I think we need to have a larger conversation around is anticipatory democracy, where that local, regional, and large scale government can talk about agency, because one size does not fit all, and it's really building that trust and that agency for those communities to start solving the problems.
And thank you. And thank you. That really puts some context into what we're talking about. Sohail, you mentioned a few things, the 3 points, which are really making sense. Is how do you put trust into this between governments and people, and what's the way to do it, right? That's, I think, the fundamental pillars of being able to even deliver any service to citizens. What's the role of technology, right? We're hearing a lot about technology. We're hearing about artificial intelligence and blockchain and automation and smart cars. All that is great on one level, but come an incident like COVID-19, and we're not focused on just that conversation right now, but come incidents like that or not, what is the role of technology? And yes, it can help us do more things, but realistically, what should governments expect? Take a look at Israel right now as being the top country that's vaccinated the maximum number of people. Are they using any specific technology for that? I don't think so. I don't think any of the big giant buzzwords are applicable there, but it's pure execution. It's pure delivering the results. And so that's what I want to talk about. Is it technology that governments should focus on, or automation? What is it that's going to take us beyond? Sohail?
So again, honoring Alvin Toffler here. I remember his book, The Adaptive Corporation. When I was an intern at the Hawaii Judiciary in the 80s, their local futurists, I was reading that over and over. And they said, well, you like that book a lot. I go, well, he really anticipated the disruption we're in now. And part of that disruption is There's a trust system. It breaks apart. We're in the transition. And so COVID-19 or climate change or demographic shifts or gender equity, this is all the disruption, the anxiety people feel about the grand transition the planet's going forward, going into. So in my work, what I've seen I know government of Cambodia, we did a 2050 project, and it was around the future of technologies. And the critical part was, how do we find a narrative that works? And this room of young leaders, number 2 in their ministries, they did a narrative shift. They said, right now we're in the world of the e-monk, paper-based, lack of trust, many monks fighting for space. We want to move to the world of the e-Buddha. Yeah. The e-Buddha technology is transparent. It's easy to see. You're using blockchain. It's accessible. The technology enhances trust, makes ease of business. So they were very clear. It's not the technology, it's culture and technology working actually together. The old world of technology has changed, a new one's emerging. How do we make sure we have a story that helps us? When we were working with another country in Southeast Asia, the key ministerial policy leader, he took our course in futures, went to the speeches. Then he came and he said, well, he was in charge of driverless cars automation stuff. So he went to the head of sanitation and said, I want to automate all our garbage trucks. Now the head of sanitation said, you confuse sanitation with garbage trucks. Actually, our truck drivers communicate with citizens. You misunderstood their role. So I don't want your driverless trucks. Now this policy leader, he actually understood anticipatory governance and the key tools. He said, he remembered the term alternative future scenarios. So he said, okay, how about scenario 2 at night? Do they love to talk to people at night? And the person, he said, actually, no. We would appreciate automated driverless trucks at night. During the day, our role in governance is connection, community with technology. At night, please let us sleep. And so when I spoke to him, he said the critical factor that led to that success, technology adoption, was being able to think not of one future, but many futures. In Cambodia, the suggestion was a narrative that makes sense to local people. E-Buddha, e-monk to e-Buddha doesn't make sense, I think, in London or Salt Lake City, especially in Salt Lake City, but it makes sense in Phnom Penh. So this is the localized stories that help us make this transition.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real danger in putting technology first before humanity and for people, because you can't build trust between technology. People build trust. It's heart to heart. It's mind to mind. It's looking, it's that human energy that builds that trust and really builds that culture. So I think technology has its role, but if we feel ourselves getting too fascinated with technology and leaning into technology like it is going to solve our problems without considering humans and that human-centric perspective, I think there's a real danger. Just in the United States, if you take some of the companies, you take the Defense Department, very, very focused on technology, and then the human side is secondary. And there's all sorts of issues around technology. We could spend a lifetime talking about algorithms and how they're put together and how kind of past bias gets wrapped into the algorithms that take humans out and for the detriment of decision making. But I do think there is a balance if we're very deliberate in understanding that convergence of technology and humans, and then building that into our organizations, and that takes a reexamination of our organizations and how we've approached the structure and the governance of the past.
So my guess is, my understanding now from what you're saying is that let's put the human being first. Let's put a humanized approach first, because Technology, yes, it can help automate, but if it doesn't address the needs of humans and people who are living in these communities, the equation doesn't help. There are some societies which are really accelerating the investment in technology. And I feel right now it's just many pockets, right, but that are in the news. For example, we're hearing about some organization or some company trying to create automation in a retail where they are going to have touchless, seamless interactions when you walk into a retail store, and whatever you carry, your basket is going to automatically calculate that, and you can leave. And so there's that frictionless revolution that's kind of coming up maybe in the next few years, right? Where there's the seamless transactions will take place in retail. Retail is a great example of some really cool things that are happening. Is that something that governments should look into, creating, reducing friction? Because there's a lot of friction that takes place. For example, you're renewing your driver's license. I live in Canada. I have to go and actually do it, or fill up a manual form. Renew your health card, renew your passport. Like, we're still working with paper and walking into places and standing in a queue in many places. What's kind of the future in terms of reducing this friction and creating seamless experiences for citizens? Deb, tell us about the US. What is happening in the US, or what have you seen?
I want to kind of add to what Sohail said is the foresight. A lot of technology is put in place and being put in place with promises that it will limit the friction or it will help people. But sometimes it's done without that foresight into the why. Why are we doing this, and how do we understand this, and how is this going to change the way the system works? And there is a lot of momentum and a lot of push from companies to sell technology, implement technology with, and they're guaranteeing that there will be, increased value or limited friction. But is that guaranteed? Have we gone through the foresight? Have we done the alternate futures to understand? And have we worked through, as Sohail said, is the narrative of how this is going to change? Because I do think there is, especially in the US, a lot of technologies that is being embedded in businesses and in the government that really will not come to pass with the value that is being promised, because they didn't do that head work before the footwork.
I think I 100% agree there. I know one university I was working with, we did their 2040 vision, and then we did it by stakeholders. So we asked the professors, and the vice chancellor had a decision to make. His cash, does he build new dorms or not, etc. Where does he put his infrastructure budget? The professors all said by 2025, they don't want to be near a campus. There's not one professor in the room. I had 150 people in the room. Said, we want virtual, holograms, seamless, etc. Students all said, we want a physical campus. So I said, what's your story here? They go, we want to escape our parents. And so this really, and the head of infrastructure said, oh my God, there's a need for pedagogy, but the university is a need to actually find love. Yeah. I mean, if I can say it like that. So this is, whatever you decide, we understood the views of different stakeholders, and that becomes critical. So of course we want seamlessness. We want it easy. My driver license renewal took 15 seconds in Brisbane. It was just all done really in seconds. Again, when I went to Cambodia, they had gone from paper to paperless. My visa application took 1 email, 2 emails done. So we want ease of use because that creates public trust. Yeah. Now let me shift it to the view of the politician. When I work with counselors, political leaders, they say, yeah, that's so interesting. Help me get reelected. So their pitch to fund seamlessness or the new technologies is based on reelection. As one political leader said, you have to understand, I really don't care about 2040. I'm not going to be elected then. Help me use the vision so I can provide services today. Yeah. So that's that trust, figuring out their needs. Now, if citizens don't feel trusted, then seamlessness is actually what organized crime loves. So when we work with Interpol, law enforcement, I mean, I tell young kids, I say, what should I do when I grow up? I said, well, you should join organized crime. They fit Toffler's 1980 criteria, agile, flexible, innovative, anticipatory, figuring it out.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we don't want that. So that trust is working with citizens so they actually trust and understanding anytime there's an opening, we have a global dark organization structure ready to jump in.
Yeah, and technology allows, before we just put technology on the old processes, we should clean sheet what the processes are, and then decide where the technology fits, because so much of this is just replacing the technology with people or overlaying the technology into the same the same structure of operations that we have. And so this really allows, this time really allows us to kind of clean sheet and say, if we didn't have this capability, what would it look like? For instance, making seamless driver's license. Well, why do we even have driver's license? Maybe it's time, to think about these organizations and the structures that we have clean sheeted for a better future for citizens, and then decide where the technology needs to go to support that. So I think that's a big opportunity, rather than just trying to implement technology and wedge it into and retrofitting it back into what we've got right now. Because as we started this conversation, COVID really opened up where our seams are.
Yep.
And, there is a future out there that we just take technology and band-aid it up, but that's just going to cause other issues and that we'll see down the road. Let's take this time, clean sheet it, use foresight, and then determine what, how are we going to engineer that using technology to the best that technology does.
Incredible. I want to ask one question about privacy, about data, and with the evolution of this automation and everything that's happening, the seamless nature of things that's upcoming. There's a lot of data that's going to be generated. What is your recommendation to governments who are going to be working with their citizens using this data? So we have this entire ecosystem. You've got governments, you've got citizens, you've got vendors, companies, private sector, and a lot of data being generated. What should be the recommendation to work with this data? How do we go about it and not create a situation where citizens don't have that trust in their governments? Any recommendations would be really, really welcome.
I mean, this
Well,
is.
I think there's going to be new business models that put the human in the middle of their data, and we're seeing some of the outcry right now around using our individual patterns of life to sell to marketeers so that they can sell back to us. I think there is a personal privacy issue, and I think individuals might get smart and say, hey, if you want my data, you can pay for my data. And so new businesses will come up from that. I think data is interesting because our again, this is an old model of light it, gate it, guard it. I want all of it, and we can't, we're generating more data in one day than we did in the whole history of man. So how do we do that? I think it's going to get, there's going to be, I think, some need to understand time and the relevance of time and the relevance of time to that data, because that data may only be useful in this small amount of time, in a spectrum of time. And after that, it's totally irrelevant. And so it's not more data and it's not more capability to analyze data. It's in the relationship to time and when I need that data and when that data is relevant.
Excellent, thank you. Sohail, you were saying something as well. You had a comment.
I agree with Deborah there. If we go from, this is part of the tension of the transition. Does government own the data? Does the corporate sector? And I think Deborah's right. It's ways where we own our data. But then we also know social change doesn't come out from data orientation. It's really figuring out that new story. When we've done governance workshops throughout Asia, the old story has been consistent, which is the story of the big man. The big man is leader. And the big man could be, the prime minister, the landlord, the corporation. And the vision that's come out in so many workshops was really around the food court, the fresh food market. Meaning we have individuals exchanging ideas, emotions, romance, they're exchanging, and the role of the state is to make sure the exchange is fair. And in that sense, I have to be aware of my own data and also the meaning making from it. And that's why this transition, you get all these protests, because the old world is not just died out, it's dead. And now we're creating the new one. And that's why I think Deborah keeps on insisting, is futures about optimizing strategy in today's world? That's one game. Or is futures about creating the new world? That's a whole different game. Our role as futurists is to always ask the tough question. You're developing a better strategic plan, strategic foresight in scenario one, which is fine, but then why are you bothering us? We're here to open up for scenario 2, 3, and 4, and to find the one that creates a world, which for me is coevolution, humans, nature with technology in wise ways.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both Deb as well as Sohail. I know we're out of time, and I really, really appreciate you both joining us. Final recommendations, like give us one recommendation, both of you, that you would want governments to do in the next 2 to 5 years. What's that one thing that you would recommend, Deb?
I would say flip the equation around and put people first, and then and then ask those questions from a people perspective, not from the existing organization and not from technology.
So people first. Thank you, Deb. What about you, Sohail?
Agree with people first. I would only add, as we're all futurists here, decide how you do that through your vision of 2030.
Yeah.
Don't let past conflicts, hurts, mistakes lead you. Here's where we wish to be as a society, civilization, planet. We use that image to decide strategy.
Incredible. Thank you so much, both of you. Again, here we are on the GX podcast. And to all our listeners, we've had an incredible panel today. Deb Westphal, as well as Sohail Inayatullah, thank you for joining us on this podcast episode. Everybody take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.